I want to showcase a spear gun I made somewhere around about 2015. The gun was a Midhandle. It was about 1.25 metres long, if I recollect correctly. I named it Plain Jane because there was no trick joinery, or I built it to take largish open water fish. To give it a bit of grunt, I had 3 16mm rubbers. The forward handle was pretty simple and plain, but cut to fit my hand. For anti-slip on the handle, I used the stuff they use on steps. I would have thought the glue would have been pretty weatherproof, but as it turns out, after I soaked the gun for a while, the anti-slip started to come off. I took it, scraped away the glue that was on the back, and then glued it down with Loctite 406. It seemed to hold pretty well after that. Coming back from the handle was a push rod to activate the trigger. If I recollect properly, I used a mortise and tenon joint to get the handle into the stock. I had to drill a hole through the tenon that came from the handle to allow the push rod to get through. I had a shock absorber on the shooting line, which was made by wrapping a bit of shock cord with Spectra. The Spectra, of course, was exceedingly strong, but it was the kind that didn't have the outer casing around the outside, and it tended to catch on things, and you tended to get stray bits of Spectra thread sticking out. The gun had a bit of bulk and needed ballast. I used lead shot encased in epoxy. So, how did it perform? It was pretty close to neutral in the water and just sank very slowly. The front end tipped and hung downwards, and this was exactly the way I wanted it. I completed it just before a trip, and I hadn't had time to test it properly. So I got a drink bottle, tied a bit of rope on it, then sat down and did some target shooting in a lagoon. At 6 metres from the tip, the spear shot maybe 30mm to the left of where I expected it. When I braced the gun with my other hand, the gun shot maybe 15-20mm to the right of where I thought I was pointing it. And it shot pretty well straight, pretty well flat. This seemed to be acceptable accuracy to me. But how did it work on fish? It certainly penetrated and held this GT in the Coral Sea, and for a while it seemed this was going to be a GT specialist gun. But in French Polynesia, I shot this trevally, which looks like a GT, but it's a different species and it tastes a lot better. I also managed to slam a wahoo with it too. I actually hit several, but the sharks got the others. And in Indonesia, I managed to use Plain Jane to take a doggy. So the gun functioned well enough. In Polynesia, if someone expresses admiration for something you've got, it's considered good manners to give that object to that person. And so, I parted company with Plain Jane. And I got a message later telling me that the gun had been put to use. Not exactly by the person I gave it to, but someone associated with them. They hadn't used it in the open water, but rather in the lagoon. These are the sorts of fish that I probably wouldn't have chased, but I'm told that the Polynesians favour them. So, I reckon Plain Jane was a pretty successful gun. What I did notice, though, was that the people I was diving with were using big Alemani guns, and their guns had substantially more range than mine did.